Welcome back to This Week. Time now to get the views of our media and political experts. MMA Creative Vice President, Democratic operative Mike Kopp, and syndicated talk show host Steve Gill. Welcome, gentlemen. We're a week past the midterm elections, the fallout still falling out, as it were. But the next big issue here in Tennessee, as we heard from Representative Beth Harwell, we'll hopefully hear from Glen Casada next week, is the Speaker of the Tennessee House. It looks to me like, and you guys can weigh in on this, a real battle or a real divide is brewing between moderate side, which would be Beth Harwell, and the more conservative side, which would be Glen Casada.
I think that's exactly right, even though she kind of dodged that. The bottom line is there is an ideological divide in the caucus. I think the overwhelming number of Republicans in the House caucus certainly ran as conservatives,
right,
said they were conservatives, and yet you've got a few of these folks now that are saying, hey, it's nobody's business who we vote for. We're going to do it in secret. Now, interestingly, the ones backing Beth Harwell are the ones that tend to want to keep their vote secret. But you've had folks like Steve McDaniel, who was a proponent of the income tax. You've had Kent Williams come out in favor of her. The moderate to liberal Republicans, and there are a few, are the ones that are backing her. The rest are wanting to keep it secret. And I think members of the House ought to stand up and say who you're for. Mm-hmm. It's an ideological divide. They ran as conservatives, and they either say we meant it, or I was just kidding, and I'm going to back the more moderate member.
Here's the problem that both candidates have. I think they need to think about what the voters and what the electorate's looking at. What they're hearing right now are two people that are going out there saying they're trying to outdo each other as far as who's going to run furthest to the right, who's going to try to convey the message that we're not going to work with anyone except ourselves. We're not going to try to reach across the aisle and be bipartisan, which is something that voters don't like right now. And then the other issue is they both keep talking about, we're running on our principles, but they won't talk about what that is, and they certainly won't talk about what the Republican agenda is. So they got to be careful about how they're positioning this with voters.
Well, I can certainly think back fondly to all those bipartisan days under House Speaker Jimmy Nafee. It's interesting to hear Democrats now talking about bipartisanship and compromise. I think that what you saw in the electorate when 14 net House seats were picked up by the Republican in a year where conservative values, when Tea Party values were what was on the agenda, the voters just voted very conservative. And I think that it's not a matter of trying to out-conservative each other in the race. It's trying to be as conservative as Tennessee's electorate.
This is one of those key positions that is very powerful. A lot of folks don't realize the power that is wielded by the Speaker of the House, setting appointments as far as committees, committee chairmanships, and really agenda. And her agenda and his agenda might be a little different depending on how in the election.
But again, we don't know what the agendas are, because you were asking very pointed questions about where are you going to be on this issue, and what they're saying is, well, we're still developing the agenda. But trust me, but one thing they are clear about is we don't care whether or not voters want us to work together because they want to see this government move forward. They're saying forget that. We're going to push our agenda, but we're not going to tell you what it is.
Well, I think also you've got in the House in particular who those committee chairmen are will reflect an ideological divide as well. Steve McDaniel, again, is one of the Nafee 11 who voted, even when Republicans were running, to keep House Speaker Jimmy Nafee in power. He voted for a state income tax. Do you really want him helping govern tax policy when we've got a tough budget coming up? That's the kind of person she'll make as a committee chairman, which, again, doesn't reflect where Tennessee is. Might be good for Steve McDaniel, but it's not going to be good for folks that want to hold the line on taxes in Tennessee, and I think that is a distinction.
And I think one of the challenges of all this, Bob, and why this is even more important than maybe we've seen before, is we have a governor that's never had to deal with a legislative body like this. Governor-elect Haslam has dealt with a city council that he pretty much controlled. This is our legislature that he's going to need their support on his agenda, but we've got all this infighting. It's going to be a tough year for a while.
It is an oddity, too, in that the Republicans control the House, control the Senate, and the governor's chair. What, if any, impact, what, if any, input does the governor-elect have, does the lieutenant governor have in regards to talking to people before the vote is made on the Speaker of the House?
I think the lieutenant governor won't, get visibly out backing one or the other. And I don't think that Governor Haslam is going to jump in and get involved in this fight as well. I think there are folks on both sides of this battle that are claiming they've got the implicit support of both of those figures. But I think at the end of the day, individual legislators are going to make that call based in large part on what they hear from their constituents, which is, again, why I encourage folks, whether you're for Beth Harwell, whether you're for Glen Casada, call your state legislator and make them step up and put out who they're for. We ought to do this with transparency and with visibility, not hiding in the weeds.
When Bill Haslam ran, one of his commercials was talking about how he could work together with Democrats, and he used Ned McWhorter and Phil Bredesen. He talked about getting together in all one Tennessee, and now he's facing a legislative leadership that's all about divisiveness, that's all about not working with anyone. I think he's in for a really tough row.
He also spent $15 million saying he was a conservative, so you would think he would back the conservative choice for House Speaker, unless maybe the $15 million wasn't exactly as accurate.
Speaking of the governor-elect, we're kind of waiting to see his first appointments in regards to cabinet appointments. We have seen the transition team, former Lamar Alexander employees, as it were, Tom Ingram, Lewis Levine. They will set the stage for the inauguration and those kinds of things, but really Governor-elect Haslam will be the one choosing the cabinet members, and we haven't seen some names are floating out there, but nobody chosen yet.
Yeah, I really don't think as we roll into the legislative session, you're going to see hyper-partisanship in terms of Republican versus Democrat, either from the administration or regardless of who wins the House speakership. You know, with Lieutenant Governor Ron Ramsey, you haven't seen kind of an iron-fisted partisanship in the state Senate. I think what you're going to see is going to be battles in some cases between urban and rural.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're going to see ideological divides on how you cut spending, on how you balance the budget without taxes, because I think everybody's going to be fighting hard against raising taxes. I think you're going to see rural-urban battles more than Republican-Democrat battles.
The most important decision he's got to make is who's going to be the deputy governor, the gatekeeper to everything that goes in and out of his administration.
Jason Mumpower is being talked about.
It could be to the right or it could be more moderate. And that's really the decision that most people are going to be looking at.
That's one of the key appointments. Also, finance going to be key appointments. Right. All those are key, obviously, but several more important than others.
The deputy governor is the one who controls the political agenda and who controls what the administration wants to have done. And if that person is a little too far to the right or a little too far to the moderate, that sends all sorts of signals.
I think that the Commissioner of Finance Administration and Economic Development are the other two huge ones, particularly when we're looking at creating jobs. I think that Beth Harwell was right. Jobs in the economy are the key issue. Who he picks for F&A, who he picks for economic development, I think are critical. You need superstars in both of those positions.
Let's talk about the comments by Representative Curry Todd in Memphis talking about liking illegal immigrants to rats. He said he misspoke or used the wrong wording, but really when you say something like that, it kind of goes to maybe true beliefs, kind of goes to feelings about this issue, and they're pretty hard feelings.
Well, and I think the point that he was making, even if he made it wrongly, is that if you create an incentive for continuing to have illegal immigrants come here and birth anchor babies, which is what we've seen, you will continue to see huge resources being devoted to illegal immigrants and their illegal alien children. We're seeing it in colleges, universities, we're seeing it in healthcare, we're seeing it in our prisons, we're seeing it in our economy. His point was not articulately made, but I think his concern is right on the money.
The issue, though, is that the world is watching what's happening here in Tennessee. Just like we went through the whole English-only thing, how we position ourselves to the world is what's really key here. And if the new Republican leadership is going to make those kind of irresponsible statements, they're going to create a situation where we don't have the job-creating environment we've had under Bredesen. They've got to be careful about that.
The question is whether we want to be creating jobs for illegals or creating jobs for legal citizens. I think legal citizens ought to be at the front of the line.
Steve Gill, Mike Kopp, appreciate your time and your insights. Stay with us as we continue in a moment.